when you saw the end of my Steven Universe Change Your Mind versus Steven Universe Futures finale video, well, you're gonna be seeing a compilation of 5 episodes being reviewed. I wasn't making this up. Ever since I've been watching this show and watching bits and watching every single episode of it, I really had this mindset onto doing a compilation or an anthology on reviewing episodes that are catered to one plot. Last time I did this was the Shaolin Showdown Raimundo 3-part episode where he turns into the Hailing side. But for this time, this is just part 1 of many parts of me talking about Steven and Connie. And believe me, it's gonna take almost a year for me to actually finish this up because there was so much other videos I need to put my focus on. So I'm just gonna say right now, do not expect me to instantly make videos like this anytime soon. I mean, I am gonna try to take my time with these videos, but at the same time, you're probably gonna have to wait a long time before I completely finish everything involving Steven and Connie shipping, basically. Yeah. Connverse, or whatever you want to prefer. So anyway, let's go start off with the anthology with Bubble Buddies. Steven is about to go on his bike while the gems are trying to find the Orange Spodgemy, which is a corrupted gem caused by you-know-who. And while Steven is about to go on his bike, he then encounters Connie, who's just reading her book by the ocean. And when Steven completely fell on the ground because his bike wasn't balanced, he gets caught by Connie, which causes him to run away. Yeah, it's just one of those make those impressions in front of the girl that you really like, but you end up making a really awkward impression or an embarrassment impression. So Steven heads back to his beach house while the crystal gems actually saw everything of what he's been doing. And this leads to a few humorous jokes or a gag involving mainly Pearl and Amethyst making fun of Steven. Well, not really making fun, but actually enjoying the fact that Steven is actually with a female. While Garnet completely just shoves in and stops Pearl and Amethyst, completely messing with Steven's funky flow, which is the quotes that Steven and she spoke in this episode. So, Steven decides to completely do another impression again by completely taking a glow bracelet that was actually from Connie, which is going to show in a flashback, but I'm going to get to that later. But just before he's about to make another impression, a boulder was about to fall on Connie, so Steven protects him by using his powers. And one of his first powers from the first season is a giant bubble that he and Connie is completely stuck in. And since that they're having interactions with each other, they need to find a way in order to have the bubble burst. And to be quite honest, that's really all I have to say involving the episode's plot. When I first watched this episode, when I was binge watching the whole series, I cannot believe how excellent this episode is when it comes to the impressions that Steven and Connie made for each other. Believe me, wherever you completely see an episode involving a male character fall in love with a female character or vice versa, you should usually expect that the character is mostly shy and just wants to actually make a proper impression, but at the same time he either makes an awkward or embarrassing impression. But since that we're actually into 3 minutes into this episode where we actually get to see Connie and Steven actually talking to each other even though that they're trapped in a bubble, it makes this episode give the show a lot more originality and also a good relationship between Steven and Connie. Now, for everyone who's been watching the show or hasn't, should probably understand that the earlier episodes is where we need to actually get some character development from Steven and Connie. I mean, people may debate that the first season is mostly slice of life, although later seasons are more serious with character arcs growing, similar to Adventure Time in the earlier seasons. But at the same time, I really think that they really know how to handle relationships earlier in the series and building it up until we get to the later seasons. believe me, this episode really shows to me that they actually knew what they were doing before they get into one of the most serious stuffs like the diamonds and stuff like that. Episodes that tries to build up relationships like this can easily make one of the major highlights that isn't part of the main plot involving Steven and the Crystal Gems fighting off the diamonds or corrupted creatures. And considering that this is one of the earlier seasons, you should really expect season 1 Steven much, since that he isn't smart and he's mostly over the top. Well, it makes sense that he's a child, but considering that the little that we know about him by the time this episode aired back in December of 2013, it's really odd to actually see Steven in this position like he was in the final episodes or final seasons of the series in general. So what I'm talking about is that Steven is mostly oblivious of the fact that Lars is mocking him, saying that he's in love with Connie, and the fact that Sadie is just trying to be respectful towards Steven while completely going against the laws for making fun of Steven. But that's just something that they usually do when it comes to Lars and Sadie's relationship in the earlier seasons. Getting back to the main plot, Steven and Connie go to the pier and the theme park in order to have other ways in order to get out of the bubble. They talk to Onion in order to get the bubble destroyed, and Steven's other idea is to go on roller coaster tracks and have the bubble completely destroyed. But all it did, it just launches him and Connie off into the ocean. Yeah, into the ocean. That really goes to show that the bubble is completely indestructible, and the more details you see like this, you can really tell that the powers from the gems are really impressive. Not to mention indestructible from any impact. And when they get into the bottom of the ocean with no way out, Connie officially snaps, but not like snap like she did in season 5, which I'm gonna get to probably a year later or so, is what we actually get to see on the fact that she never made any friends because she is always invisible to anywhere that she goes. The dialogue that she spoke in this episode really shows that she became a really likable character just by the first episodes of this show. And when you completely see her completely breaking down in tears without getting what she wants by making a single friend, really goes to show that her life just isn't really the best. But at the same time, when she completely understands more about Steven, her life isn't even come close to what Steven's life is like. And remember the glow bracelet that I mentioned about Steven grabbing it from the freezer? Well, he finally gives it to Connie. And he completely said that she dropped it during the parade last year, and he wanted to give it to her while also keeping it in the freezer so that it can stay glowing for a little longer. This scene is pretty much one of the most important scenes to start off a relationship for several reasons. For one, like I mentioned about the impressions that Steven is just trying to make in front of Connie but ends up making awkward embarrassment, he actually did an impression really good in this scene. Granted, it took about a few minutes in this episode for him to do that, but at the same time he managed to do it. Secondly, compared to where we see Connie in the later seasons where she mostly gets character development, well, minus season 5, you can really tell that she really isn't the type of people who can be in a crowd while enjoying something while having friends, because like she said, she didn't have any friends whatsoever. So actually seeing that Steven actually wanted to give the bracelet back to Connie really shows the development between Steven and Connie. So I actually found this scene a lot more better. And third and lastly, after they completely expressed themselves about just trying to do the right thing while Connie is still enjoying it, the bubble disintegrates as they rushed up to the surface, and they see the orange spargements from before about to attack Steven and Connie, which actually gave Steven an idea, because the glow bracelet is actually what attracts the orange spargements. Steven uses the bracelet to lure the Spider-Man to one of the pillows so that it can destroy and have it completely stuck with no way to escape. But that also means that Steven and Connie are out of trouble before getting completely eaten. Seriously, those 3 reasons I expressed really shows that you can actually see how well the pacing is in the earlier episodes and seasons from the show. And when we see the 2 characters reconcile, well, they kind of did that once before the bubble was destroyed. You can really tell that the other characters really actually see what is actually going on, but that's just basically what happens. Well, you have Guardians, and the Guardians mostly adore what's going on, and it's mostly misunderstanding. And then we get the scene, well, Garnet just completely pulls Amethyst and Paul away. And considering that this is the first episode involving Connverse, there's gonna be pretty much a lot exploring involving Connie and Steven's relationship. And yes, I am aware that in the earlier seasons, it's not in a romantic relationship. It's mostly a friend zone relationship, but not a complete friend zone relationship. But in the later seasons, they will obviously make this as a romantic relationship. But I'm gonna get to that once I get to that. Even though that the other episodes I'm gonna get to in the future will probably show romantic feelings from Steven to Connie, even though that doesn't end up happening in front of Connie. So that's my review of Bubble Buddies, and I gotta say, it was a really good introduction. For the first episode to introduce Connie, especially one of the earlier episodes of the show, they really did what they could. I don't have any issues with this episode, but like I said, I'm mostly into the earlier episodes than the later episodes in the other cartoon. Granted, I don't keep up, but once I get to the later episodes, I will still do a good critique of them, so you're gonna have to wait until I get to them. So anyway, I give this episode an 8 out of 10, and let's get into the next episode, Lion 2, The Motion Picture. Correction, it's actually called Lion 2 the movie, but at the same time the motion picture and the movie is basically the same thing, but whatever. Even though that this episode is mostly a lion episode, it is still the second time we actually get to see Connie in the first season of this show. So I can really tell that for this episode, compared to what I saw in the later series, it really goes to show that these types of episodes really shows how important Connie is even in the earlier seasons. The episode begins with Connie showing Steven a trailer of Dark Copter 3, which is her favorite film of the franchise. So this episode is mainly that this universe's world movies is popular and the other character wants the main character to watch the movie with her or him. And to be quite honest, I actually found this plot really interesting, especially that they need to get to the theater, which is far away from Steven's beach house. In order to get to the theater much more faster, Steven introduces Connie to Lion, which she's instantly shocked on seeing a lion. And since that this is the second time we get to see Lion, I am going to be discussing Lion's character in this, since that I'm probably not going to talk about the first Lion episode. Not saying I'm having anything against it, it's just that I'm focusing on the shipping between Steven and Connie, so don't expect me to actually talk about most of the characters in episodes like these, but I am going to try my best. However, instead of heading to the theater immediately, they get teleported into an empty temple, which set up the future episode involving Paul and Steven. As for in this episode, it's revealed that it actually has weapons like swords that can appear once Steven, who is a crystal gem, places his hand on it, and in order to have it activate, Steven has to be ticklish or something in order to have this device or something to work. And to be quite honest, considering that this is the episode where we actually get to see a sword and Connie in this, I can honestly tell that they actually had plans way ahead of time than I thought. Seriously, in the second season, which I'll get to in the future, we get to see Connie practicing on becoming a sword fighter. But then when we see this episode, which was before the second season, I can really tell that the writers of Steven Universe really knew how to handle the earlier seasons when it comes to character arcs. To me, it really shows that Connie can just be more than just a bookworm, not an insult, but basically being something else instead of just reading a book. The more I look at these characters, the more I can understand that cartoon characters shouldn't be one thing. And since this is the second episode that Connie makes an appearance, you can really tell that they're gonna do a lot of development involving her and relationship with Steven. And then when Steven accidentally summons a robot that can instantly destroy him and Connie, that is where I can actually see that they're trying to have the relationship with more depth in the later seasons. Because when you completely see a robot about to attack Steven and Connie, you may think that if this is the first time you watch this episode, you know that there was something that Connie might be able to do that Steven is unable to do. Because we all know that Steven may be a crystal gem, he is still not a sword fighter. And even if this episode takes place before Connie becomes a sword fighter, we still get to see some foreshadowing when it comes to Connie's development as the series goes on. And when Connie told Steven that you shouldn't watch the movie with me because you have more important things going on, you can really tell that the development between Steven and Connie is slowly improving with each episode that they're part on. Believe me when I say this, is that when you're completely in a situation where your friend is going through some serious situations involving magical stuff or just really stressful times, way worse than yours, even if your parents are strict, you can really tell that his life is a lot more important than watching the movie in theaters. But at the same time, Steven just refuses because he just wants to be Connie's friend. And since that these two characters are slowly getting to know each other, it's really obvious that the earlier episodes from this show is going to show the cliche episode plots, like having two parents or guardians meet each other, which I'm going to get to later, and the hobbies that Steven isn't accustomed to, or vice versa with Connie. So I can really tell that this episode really did what it could in order to be a really interesting step when it comes to Steven and Connie's relationship, because it's really obvious that the different hobbies that you're into, the other person or your friend would not be into one of the hobbies that you're into. So it actually kind of makes sense onto why Connie and Steven had this conversation once they head back to Beach City. But to me, that really makes me appreciate this relationship a lot more than I did before. As for Lioness, considering that he's one of those characters who doesn't speak, but then again he's an animal, and the fact that he is a really different type of creature compared to other creatures that we've seen, it's really understandable that his motivations is just to show Steven the things that he hasn't seen before, especially that the crystal gems didn't show him the empty temple and the podium of weapons and armors. I can really tell that Lion really did a really interesting impression in this episode compared to the last episode. As for later episodes, it's mostly debatable, because what Lion does in this scene, well, compared to what he does in the third episode, which, my correction, that episode is better than this, is, well, he gives Connie and Steven Rose Quartz's sword. Yeah. I can honestly believe that rewatching this episode again for preparation of this part 1 anthology review, I can really tell that this episode really knew what it was doing way ahead of time to set up the later events in the later seasons. They used the sword to stop the robot from destroying them, and geez, even though when Connie only used Steven for help by completely using the sword against the robot, it is still really good foreshadowing. Seriously, the last time I watched this episode, well, actually the first time, is well, I thought that Connie was using a different kind of sword. I didn't actually think that this was the exact same sword that she used in the later seasons until it was destroyed in the reunion episode, or reunited episode. Seriously, that's just how much I actually love the attention of detail in episodes like this, where they set up everything in the later episodes, all because of these few minutes of character development. And the episode ends with Steven, Connie, and Lion watching Dogcopter 3 on the big screen, with an MGM parody with Lion being the lion in the parody itself. I was originally not going to review this episode as part of this Anthology series because of how long it's going to take for me to talk about every single episode. But the more I think about it, I can really tell that details like these, especially on how it foreshadows in late episodes, really goes to show that the filler episodes involving Connie is basically the highlight of the filler episodes. Now, for me personally, the filler episodes in this show in general are instantly a mixed bag. I mean, I can understand that people are instantly complaining on the fact that it's skipping the major plot and it's extending it way too long while having most of the focus on the Steven filler episodes. But for episodes like this, when it comes to Connie's arc, I can really tell that they honestly knew what to do with Connie in order to have a really interesting development when it comes to foreshadowing. If you haven't watched this show before and you're actually binge watching this from the first episode to the final episode, which includes Steven Universe's future, I can instantly tell you that you're probably going to be seeing a lot of details when it comes to the relationship involving Steven and Connie. Especially when we get to see Connie and Steven use Rose's sword, which is also a foreshadowing to Connie using Rose's sword in the second season. I really think that this episode did slightly better over the last episode, considering that there was so much of it that I completely missed out when it comes to my first viewing. And watching this for a second time and doing a little bit more research on it, I can really tell you that this episode is way better, not really way better, but better than Bubble Buddies, which is why I'm giving this episode an 8.25 out of 10. And the sad thing is, we're not even halfway there. Seriously. There's only 3 more episodes to talk about in this video alone, and I'm already just getting started with this Connverse Anthology. Anyway, the next episode I'm going to be reviewing for this part is an Indirect Kiss, which isn't really much of a Connverse episode. It's mainly Steven and the Crystal Gems trying to fix something before Amethyst dies, but at the same time, since this actually leads to more development involving the relationship, it's really fair to talk about this episode as part of the Anthology. This episode begins with Steven telling the story to Connie about what's been happening to him today. In the first scene of his story, we saw Amethyst goofing around until she falls off a cliff, which is causing her to lose part of herself because of the fact that she's a crystal gem, and considering that crystal gems are different than humans, she's about to use her body parts by completely stretching them out very badly while also speaking in reverse. The only option to have Amethyst be back to the way she was is to go to a fountain where Rose's tears can cure the situation that Amethyst is at right now. And I gotta say, considering that this is Rose we're talking about, who is aka Pink Diamond, you can really tell that they really want to actually have the cure be a lot more serious while also completely having a heartwarming moment between Steven and her mother. But since I just said that Rose was Pink Diamond all along, it's honestly hard to look at this episode the same way you did back in 2014. For me personally, I honestly think that this episode really knew how to handle Steven's situation as a crystal gem compared to what Connie does in her life with strict parents. Believe me when I say this, is that when Stevens is trying to be honest with Connie while talking out his problems, you can really tell that Connie, who was in the first episode before she met Steven, was invisible without making any friends whatsoever. So I honestly think that if you were ever in this situation, you will probably be like Connie if she actually see the things that Steven has went through, while also just trying to have an open mind when it comes to being a close friend towards Steven. Getting back to the main plot of this episode, It's a typical Steven and the Crystal Gems going on an adventure and trying to stop a corrupted gem, or a different type of plot. And I gotta say that this episode involving Amethyst trying to be saved by having to go to a fountain that can heal up everything, I can honestly tell that Steven really wants to do everything he can in order to stop Amethyst from dying. And since that was part of his trauma in the future series, it really goes to show that a lot of this stuff is really serious. Now, some may debate that Steven is mostly joy in the earlier seasons, but at the same time, when you get older, the more you realize that your past is gonna haunt you, and the more you learn from your mistakes. Granted, Steven didn't do anything wrong in this episode since the amethyst fell off a cliff, but when it comes to his trauma, it's still gonna be stuck into his mind. And since this is the first time I'm ever talking about Paul and Garnet when it comes to them being the major plot in these episodes, granted, I did talk about Change Your Mind and Steven Universe Future, but consider that there were side characters and there were tools for Steven to work with, I'm just gonna say right now that their presence in this episode is pretty much the highlight of this episode. Not because of how helpful they are to Steven, but the fact that they're just trying to take the situation seriously while also just trying to save Amethyst from getting killed. And since that they're trying to figure out a way in order to have the Fountain of Roses Tears to go on, is literally a task that has to happen, otherwise they won't be able to succeed their task. Granted, they don't do much in this, considering that Amethyst is the only character who's dealing with a midlife crisis, well, mainly because it was mostly her fault that she fell off the ledge. It still makes you really relate to Paul and Garnet on just trying to help on the situation, since that they're way more powerful gems than Steven. But considering that they're the reasons why the fountain was working properly and it wasn't Steven all along, you can really tell onto why Steven would feel extremely depressed that it wasn't entirely him that saved Amethyst's life. But at the same time, this is a work in progress when it comes to Steven, especially that this was before Mio Gem. As for Steven in this episode, the reason why he's extremely depressed is because he actually thought he saved Amethyst's life, but since I mentioned that it was actually Paul and Garnet, he's really depressed that he isn't used for the help that Amethyst, Garnet, and Paul they go on adventures, and the fact that he's mostly useless to them. Give this episode some credit that this is one of the earlier episodes from Season 1. Okay, granted this episode is 24, but at the same time, Season 1 is the longest season out of any other season from this show. So they really did what they could in order to actually give Steven some kind of a purpose. Granted, the Steven-only perspective got worse as the series goes on, but I'm gonna get to that in a different video in the future. His scenes involving Amethyst is pretty much one of the highlights of this episode, for mainly the fact that he's dealing with a situation while Paul and Garnet tries to figure out a different solution in order to have the fountain go working. And since that Amethyst doesn't have the ability to move and kept using her body while also speaking in reverse, no kidding, there's actually a video where we get to see the dialogue from Amethyst in reverse, which is just in normal dialogue. The way that Steven is dealing with this kind of stress, especially the fact that Amethyst is this close of dying, really shows that he wants to be better, just like Amethyst, Paul, and Garnet. But little did he know that it was actually them that completely saved the fountain. It really goes to show that he's really upset that he won't be able to have some kind of purpose with the crystal gems. Which takes us back to the reason onto why this is our Connverse episode, just like the last one. Well, I mentioned that because I was planning on skipping this episode, but then again, I didn't have much plans in the earlier days of me thinking up with these ideas, so don't judge me. The reason why the scenes between Connie and Steven are important is because, like I mentioned, is that Steven is dealing with a depression that he wasn't really important, and the fact that his powers are mostly useless. But Connie said to Steven that you don't need magical powers by being with her. That really goes to show that Connie is actually respectful towards Steven, since this is the 3rd episode, and the fact that she listened to everything of what Steven told about his story with the crystal gems today. If this episode never happened, I can guarantee you that the relationship between Connie and Steven won't improve whatsoever, considering that we're just gonna get more cliche episodes when it comes to love letters and parents meeting the guardians of Steven. And in my opinion, if this episode was an episode that was just gonna be like every other episode, then this episode will probably have the cliche format of a character talking to another character or what they did today, and the end of the episode, nothing emotional happens whatsoever, which is one of those episodes that does happen in the real world, won't be memorable, it would just be forgettable at most. And considering that these episodes involve Steven and the Crystal Gems just trying to fight a corrupted monster or doing other things, expect the emotions to come up in these episodes, because no matter what, they will still come. Granted, not all of them, but at the same time, it really makes the character relationships improve as the series goes on. After Connie took a drink from Steven's juice box, she's about to kiss him by the screenshot alone, but she then stopped because she had a headache, but then she realized her eyesight vision is changed. She no longer needs lens in order to see through the glasses. She can actually see everything just like Steven does without any glasses. Apparently, it was because of Steven's spit that actually healed the vision from Connie. So apparently Steven does have some kind of a purpose with his powers. It was his spit that can actually heal anything, not just his tears. Well, when it comes to Leo episodes involving him fixing Lars and Jasper, it's a really debatable whether you are on board if that's okay or not. But for here, when it comes to his spit, it really goes to show that they really did a good job on having Steven be half human while also being half crystal gem. That is something I actually enjoy from Steven's character in this show the most. This episode was centering around the depression of Steven and him telling his story to Connie. And then when he actually learned that some of his powers actually healed Connie's eyesight, really makes this episode a truly better episode than the last one. And yes, I know that this is the second time I've stated that since I finished my perspective on Lion 2 the movie, but do you really see how good this relationship that they're doing? And this is the 3rd episode that I'm discussing right now, and there's still pretty much 10 or more left to discuss in the later years. Well, not really later years, but in the later months whenever I get back to this shipping Anthology. Seriously, this is one of those examples onto how Steven Universe could have been a great cartoon, but due to the decision making, it just didn't happen, which I am afraid I'm going to be talking about that once I get to season 5 when it comes to this relationship. But that's going to take up a lot, but that's going to probably happen either next year or something else along the line at the end of this year, depending on what I do. But just looking at this season, it's really depressing that wherever you say how far they come when it comes to the relationship, you cannot deny that the earlier episodes, mainly from this one, are better than the ones in the later seasons. Sure, I'll discuss what I have when it comes to the episodes involving seasons 2 through 5, but compared to those episodes to this, I honestly think that they really knew how to start somewhere, but as for the middle part, despite the fact that the Connie episodes are still filler episodes, they could have at least tried to actually make us sympathize with Connie, because I'm just gonna move on because I'm not going to say the 2 words that you're probably familiar with. All in all, this episode deserves a 9 out of 10. So far, this is the best episode I've seen involving the Connverse Anthology, but since there's 2 more episodes to discuss, let's get into fusing Cuisine. Okay, I'm just gonna get this out of the way. This is the weakest episode of this anthology. Yeah, I'm being extremely happy, but then seconds later, I'm mostly depressed with a frown on my face. Well, what do you actually expect? This is an anthology, so you need to expect that episodes are in order. I have to review or have to be in order so I can actually talk about them in the chronological order. You need to understand that. If you were in my seat right now, you would do the same. So anyway, this episode is mainly about, like I mentioned in the episodes that I talked about, Steven, the Crystal Gems, or his guardians, meet with Connie's parents. And that's basically it. Now, before you ask, yes, this is another filler episode, just like every other Connie episode. However, the difference is that the structure of this episode is mostly on the cliche format, which I can forgive to, but the ending is honestly more confusing and it's more rushed. That can really make this episode mostly dated, even for an episode that, if you're not into the Steven and Connie relationship. I did mention that Connie's parents are really strict no matter what they look at, the things that Connie's into. And considering that they're not welcome to actually see 3 crystal gems, or basically Steven's mothers, acting completely different and not accustomed to eating, really goes to show the situation that Steven is dealing with. I mean, he can take his father since that he's actually human, but for the crystal gems, it's gonna be a really tricky task to actually impress Connie's parents. Now, for the most part, even if this cliche has done multiple times, I'm still tolerable with it. For a show that involves different types of creatures, and I do it for crystal gems, dealing with the crisis in order to help Steven stay in a relationship with Connie by talking to Connie's parents on being respectful parents like they are, is an interesting idea. They try to make it cool, but at the same time, Garnet, Amethyst, and Pearl came up with a strategy by fusing together into a giant mother in order to impress Connie's parents. And the fusion that they formed together is Alex Strangide, this is the first episode where we get to see her make her first appearance. And to be quite honest, to give this episode credit, they actually made a good introductory by having Alex Strangide have her first appearance while trying to help Steven to stay in a relationship with Connie. But other than that, other than the joke of Garnet on the phone about children playing swords, which is Connie and Steven, and then they're bleeding and they're dead, and she said good day or something, this episode itself isn't really much of an impact. One of the issues I have with this episode is that this is the same episode that Beach Party did when it comes to the Crystal Gems hanging out with the citizens on Beach City. Even if you can debate that those characters are different from Connie's parents, it's still the same plot. And for how this plot is like, even if Pearl, Amethyst, and Garnet are fusing together to help Steven, it is still the same thing. Granted, it is a different change when it comes to Amethyst, Garnet, and Pearl not having issues with Connie's parents, but at the same time, Connie's parents are still strict no matter what. And they will instantly criticize anything if they don't like it. I would give this episode the benefit of the doubt, even if it is a cliched episode, but at the same time, watching Beach Party and this episode, even if there are still changes, it's still the same thing that the citizens of Beach City, even if Connie and her parents don't live in Beach City, aren't getting into the idea that Steven's parents are 3 crystal gems. Because at the same time, they're still human even if they're not living in Beach City. Anyway, I should probably talk about Connie's parents since this is the first time we get to see her. I get that they're strict and I can understand that they're trying to do right for Connie, but at the same time, in a later episode in Season 2 that I'm going to talk about in the future, it really goes to show that this is just basically a starting point when it comes to Connie's parents. And considering that Steven is just trying to do a good impression of Connie's parents, which are way different people than Connie when it comes to the personalities, it is mostly difficult for Steven to actually have her guardians eat food, which Paul despises foods. Like, she cannot stand eating food, which what makes her different compared to humans on Earth. And as for the other characters, mainly Garnet, and Amethyst, they're mostly plot devices. I say this because, considering that Amethyst actually likes eating food while Garnet doesn't really eat food but have the same opinions as Paul, I can guarantee you that they really didn't know what to do with the crystal gems in this other than the final minutes of this episode, but I'm gonna get to that soon. This episode itself is honestly way more predictable, and even if it's a cliche I can easily respect, it still isn't enough to make this episode good in my view. And when we get the scene of Connie's mother scolding her daughter for lying, and the fact that she's preventing her to go to be with Steven, Connie just runs away, and they don't flinch whatsoever when they see the one and only daughter running away in depression. And this leads to the issue I have with this episode. Before we get to the ending of this, we just see Connie's parents just not having any emotion of Connie just running away. In fact, it feels like they're accustomed to seeing Connie just running away on the stress that she's dealing with on just trying to have a happy life. And before any of you asks, yes, there is build up when it comes to Connie's mother in the season 2 episode, but the thing is, since that we had this episode and we didn't know what was going to happen next in the later episodes, it really makes this episode really hard to actually take the ending seriously. Now let's go talk about the ending, because quite frankly, damages this episode's credibility. After the dinner became a disaster because of what happened, Connie is mostly apologetic to Steven while Steven is apologetic to Connie. And the fact that Connie had this ideal by just completely running away so that she doesn't have strict parents is really pushing it. I mean, seriously. I get that Connie's young and stuff like that, but considering that she's 12 years old and she's gaining more education when she gets older, shouldn't she be aware that running away shouldn't be solving any problems like this? The best thing I can actually think of is to have a conversation with Connie's parents about how they shouldn't be this protective towards Connie and actually understand what she likes and what she does not. I can understand Steven doing something like this since that he never went to school or do anything of what Connie does, but considering that this just leads to a really confusing ending, really makes this episode really difficult for me to actually enjoy. So just before they ran away, Garnet, Amethyst, and Paul completely fused again as Alexandrite to stop Steven and Connie from leaving. And because Steven completely ran away with Connie, the Crystal Gems grounded Steven from watching any television for over 1,000 years. You know, I would consider this humorous the first time I saw this, but the more I think about it, the more how I see how over-exaggerating this is when it comes to the Crystal Gems not understanding how the Earth works, since that Steven is still part human. And this somehow impressed Connie's parents because the Crystal Gems are also strict like them. That's just how rushed this ending is, because we don't get to see a word from Steven or Connie about any of this, and they just had to take them by the guardians' words in order to actually have this relationship continuing on in some other way. This, in my opinion, is one of those examples on how not to rush an ending, despite the fact that this is a cliched episode involving two parents with two childs meeting each other and not being on board with the same stuff because of how different they are. It just feels like they're forcing Amethyst, Paul, and Garnet to do something in this episode, since that they're mainly plot devices for Steven to work with in order to stay in a relationship with Connie. But for how it's executed, it really makes the ending really rushed, and it honestly makes me depressed that Steven is grounded for 1,000 years from television. Seriously, I get that running away isn't a good thing, and it's something that parents can easily go against too, but seriously, 1,000 years, that is something that if Steven destroys something very important to Pearl, Garnet, or Amethyst, I can really understand, but 1,000 years? It just really shows that the Crystal Gems just aren't fully accustomed to any of the stuff of what humans do on Earth. The resolution at the end of this episode doesn't even really fit the mood, even if it's mainly two guardians of children just completely agreeing with each other, just the fact that they did something that what a mother or parent can do, which does make it realistic, but at the same time, it doesn't excuse that this was a rushed resolution to this episode. So yeah, I did not like this episode that much. I mean, sure, it had a great joke involving Garnet, the introduction of Alexandrite, but other than those, this episode really didn't do much. Granted, it kind of continued the relationship with Connie and Steven, but at the same time, it was a rushed resolution that mostly damaged it. So I give this episode a 5.5 out of 10. But there's only one more episode to culminate this video, and that episode is Alone Together. Now, this is an episode to wrap up part 1 of this anthology, and I gotta say, I was planning on not reviewing this episode as part of this first part of this anthology, but at the same time, I really think that me reviewing most of these episodes way more so I don't have to do a lot of weighing when it comes to reviewing the later episodes is honestly the better decision. I'm really relentless on making these reviews. This is like the 5th episode I'm talking about in this recording time of me reviewing the 4 episodes. I'm that relentless. The episode starts with the Crystal Gems teaching Steven how to fusion dancing. And since that we're seeing these characters dance in order to become a fusion in the earlier episodes from this show, it's really understandable that Steven should understand how to fuse into other characters. But it also shows that the fact that the fusion that we've seen between Steven and Garnet and Steven and Pearl together, which only happened at the final episode of Steven Universe, from the original that is, it really makes you think that what would have happened if we actually see these fusions in the earlier episodes before I change your mind. Steven won't be able to fuse with the other Crystal Gems because it's way too difficult to synchronize the moves in order to make the fusion happen. And considering that this is an episode where he meets with Connie in order to dance on the beach, it really goes to show that a lot of possibilities can happen in this show. And since that this is an episode that really got into the relationship shipping between Steven and Connie, expect the unexpected if you're new to this show, that is. Connie told Steven that she never danced whatsoever, and the fact that Steven is dealing with a stressful time in order to fuse with the other Crystal Gems, he thinks that he should dance with Connie in order to start somewhere, and I have to admit, it's difficult to actually fuse with someone while having the same movements in choreography with the dancing. And considering that he wants to start with Connie in order to do the dancing, even if it may be an off way in order to start off with fusion dancing, it is still a way to start somewhere in order to improve over the mistakes that Steven did in the beginning of this episode. When Connie agrees to dance with Steven, they completely have fun by dancing by the beach with the music from Steven's phone. And then the moment came while these two fused together. They fused into Stefani. The Crystal Gems say that it's impossible for a human to fuse with another human. And considering that we get an episode involving Greg trying to fuse with Rose, which didn't end up happening, this is a really unexpected discovery from the Crystal Gems. And believe me, it really makes this episode a lot more interesting to actually see the fusion of Stefani in her first appearance. And yes, I am aware that Stefani is a different person despite the fact that it's a fusion of Steven and Connie. I'm trying to understand the facts of this show in general. Garnet told Steven and Connie, in other words Stefani, that this is an experience in order to understand how fusion works. And the words that she told Stefani to do is to have fun. So the majority of this episode is just Stefani just going into Beach City, into the fusion form, and trying to understand how fusion is an important experiment that they need to be accustomed to. I really like every single bit of this episode from beginning to end, mainly the fact that they actually gave us, the viewers, an understanding of how fusion shouldn't be always about stopping crisis situations. It's considering that this is Steven dealing with fusion and trying to be accustomed to it, while also Connie doing the same thing what Steven is doing, despite the fact that she's not a crystal gem like him. It makes this episode really good to see these two being in the fusion while also becoming like a teenager or an adult, because for some reason, due to the fusion, they grow taller, which, in my opinion, people have been saying that this is way too confusing, considering that multiple fusions don't need to make you go a bit taller. But since that we see that Sapphire and Ruby fuse into Garnet, which is taller than them, I honestly think that the world building of fusion might be confusing, but at the same time, it's not that bad whether you completely get into the ideal. Whenever I watch Stefani on screen, no matter what episode it is, I can instantly tell that they try to make Stefani a different person, despite the fact that it's a fusion of Steven and Connie. In the scene where Stefani meets Lars and Sadie, they're instantly having a crush on Stefani, despite the fact that it's just a fusion. To me, even if this is mostly the fact that both genders of male and female are in a fusion together, and the connection could be a bit confusing to other people if they don't get the full story. But watching this scene really sums up that they want to have Stefani its own character, kind of like Garnet is her own character when she's in a fusion with Sapphire and Ruby. Now, yes, I am aware that the person can read other person's minds when they're in a fusion, so that they can look at any of the things that the other person did during their journeys. But at the same time, considering that they're trying to keep it a secret from anyone and actually seeing the fusion being in its own character, it really makes you understand the fact that Stefani is actually a different character compared to Steven and Connie. Granted, it's debatable whether you say that this is the same character, except the fact that it's a fusion of Steven and Connie, but at the same time, I still consider a fusion character an original character when it comes to how they're dealing in the world outside. Besides, it really shows that other fusions that other characters fuse with, they have a different personality no matter what. It's like completely having a character in a video game, and then when you're stuck to that character with a personality, you're just gonna have to accept it. Granted, this episode isn't about acceptance, it's more about having fun in the fusion. But at the same time, if we actually did have an episode involving a fusion that you're not into, but at the same time you have to deal with it, it would be mostly interesting. But like most of the production in these episodes, it just never happened. Anyway, Stefani gets invited to a wave party going on in one of the buildings in Beach City. And consider that Stefani is in the same age as the other teenagers in Beach City, it really goes to show that anything is possible when you're in a fusion. Now, this is where one of the characters, Connie, in this, is dealing with the struggle of dancing in front of everyone, since that she hasn't danced before. Now, for me personally, I did went to dance parties in my past, and I haven't danced into any one of them. But if I did, I can tell how stressful it is in order to not embarrass yourself in front of so many people. So I can understand that Connie is just dealing with the stress while Steven is just trying to get into the fusion. And we get the introduction of Kevin. I'm just gonna say this right now that every episode involving Kevin is all Connverse episodes. So this is the first time I'm ever gonna be talking about him. And the next times I'm going to be talking about him, he just gets worse and worse. But I'm just going to say right now that in his first appearance, he is alright. I mean, he doesn't know that Stefani is a fusion, and the fact that he wants to dance with her is just something that a cool guy would do at a dance party. And due to Connie slowly taking over the fusion, Stefani is really paranoid at this. Believe me. Being with a dude, despite the fact that you're a child in a teenager's body, is honestly a really difficult task to actually not embarrass in front of anyone, especially with a cool guy in the dance party. So, I can understand the struggle that Connie is dealing with, and the fact that Steven's just trying to make things right, for not only for Connie, but also not embarrassing herself. In considering that she stated that dancing someone with a friend isn't the same when you're fusing with someone, really shows that Connie actually wants to be with someone, since that she wants more experience on dancing. But at the same time, since that she never danced before, and the fact that she's gained experience, it's honestly difficult to dance with someone who is hitting on her. So yeah, it's really impossible to actually get past through this in order to actually get the dancing right with someone who's a close friend. And considering that Kevin isn't a close friend, really shows that you can understand how much that Steven absolutely despises Kevin in the next episode that Kevin makes an appearance in season 3. And when they're about to dance with Kevin, their dancing is honestly way more awkward and really difficult, considering the fact that they're just basically two children in a teenager's body that just doesn't understand how dancing works when you get older and older, which not only disturbs Kevin, but the fusion of Stefani and Connie is completely done. Well, not really done forever, but done in this episode, which actually had everyone see the bigger picture on this whole fusion thing and caused Kevin to run away, which is pretty much the only good thing that he does in this episode, is that he actually has some standards in the world that he's in. Although that doesn't excuse what we're going to see his performance is like in the next 2 episodes. Trust me, season 3 and season 5 is where we get to see Kevin at his worst. As for Steven and Connie, they laugh and joy as they dance together as the episode ends. A really weird way to end off this episode, but then again, this is the first time we get to see Stefani, so I can really tell that this is a moment where we get to see Connie just completely thrilled and actually have fun with the fusion with Steven, and she's willing to dance with Steven even how unprepared she is when it comes to dancing. This episode isn't better than Indirect Kiss, since I rate that episode on a 9 out of 10, but I'm rating this episode an 8.75 out of 10, which means that it's the second best of the Connverse episodes. And believe me when I say this, is that this episode alone really actually made me appreciate fusion and also the relationship of Steven and Connie. They did 2 plots and they execute them really good in this episode. And I gotta say, the later episodes, despite the fact that they're not as better as the earlier episodes, really did a good continuation involving this arc. If I'm ever going to discuss what I actually enjoy about fusion, especially from Stefani, I will probably do a top 10 list on the best fusions from Steven Universe if I ever got the chance. And I will add Stefani onto the list, definitely. Because as far as I'm concerned, this episode really shows how good that fusion is. So that's basically part 1 of the Connverse Anthology. I'm going to get back to this anthology either in June or in the future, depending on what I actually feel during that time. But who knows? I just really hope that I can actually make this video before I get to my June schedule of this year, that is. Yeah, I'll plan ahead of time, but that's what I do. I'll see you guys next time, and I hope you enjoy Valentine's Half Month 3.
Let's get this started again.